The window gave at the third try, and Imogen Hartwell drew her breath in slow because the hinge had always announced itself in October, and she did not need it announcing her now. She had counted the household. 3 sleepers in the east wing, 1 in the west, a footman dozing in the hall whose chin had been on his chest since the long case clock struck 4. 6 minutes until that clock struck again. 6 minutes to be over the sill and down the wisteria and across the south lawn before any candle moved behind any pane. The valise she had packed at midnight was already on the leads outside the window, set carefully so its brass corner did not catch the slate. She put one hand on the sill, one foot on the dressing stool drawn up beneath, and lifted herself into the night air with the careful precision of a woman who had nursed an invalid for 3 winters and learned that everything broken in a house could be heard from any room in it. The loha, the wisteria stem, was old and thick as her wrist. She had measured it in August, kneeling in the border under a pretense of weeding, while her father in his study wrote the letter that ended her life. She had measured the lawn, 87 paces from the south door to the boundary wall. She had measured the wall itself, 5 feet, mossed on the kitchen garden side. She had measured the lane to the turnpike, where the mail coach to York stopped for water at 5:20. She had measured everything, because measurement was the only practice the last 3 years had taught her was reliable. Sentiment was not. Hope was not. Her father's word certainly was not. The cold travelled up through her gloves where she gripped the stone, and the breath of the wisteria smelled of late summer rain and the iron underbark of an old climber that had grown into the south face of Hartwell Park for 60 years. She came down it hand by hand, careful of the dead canes, careful where the lead flashing met the brick at the kitchen offices, careful most of all when her boot found the leads of the scullery roof and rang louder than she had allowed for. She froze. Inside the scullery, a kettle ticked on the hob, and a mouse moved behind the dresser. And no other thing in the world moved at all. 3 breaths. Then 4. Then she was over the parapet and down the trellis on the kitchen garden side, and her boots were on the gravel, and the valise was in her right hand, and her left held her bonnet ribbons tight against her throat, because if it blew off in the lane she would lose 10 minutes the road could not spare. At the gate, she looked back once. The window she had climbed out of stood open, like a mouth surprised mid-word. The curtain caught on the casement bar where she had hooked it back. The room behind that window had been hers since she was 9. Her mother had been buried in May. Her father had signed the betrothal articles in August. Her father had signed her into marriage with the holder of a note he could not pay. A man she had met 3 times in her life, the last time over a luncheon table at which he had not once looked at her face, and twice had looked at her hands. 6 weeks. 6 weeks she had played dutiful daughter while she measured a wisteria stem and walked a lawn at midnight. 6 weeks she had written letters in another hand to a great-aunt in Bath she had not seen since she was 13, and the great-aunt had written back, an old hand still firm, "Come to me. Come at once. Do not write again from that house." Sewn into her stays was 1 guinea, and 4 more in her sleeve, a sealed letter in her breast pocket, and her mother's miniature beside it. That was the whole of what she was taking out of the house she had been born in. The bonnet ribbons cut into her chin. The valise dragged her right shoulder down. She turned her face toward the gate and walked, and the gravel under her feet sounded like the loudest thing in Yorkshire. 2 miles east, on the high road where it lifts out of the Wharf Valley toward the moor, Theodore Calvert, 12th Duke of Wraithmore, rode alone in the half-light. He had given his carriage and his valet leave to follow at their own pace. He did not want anyone with him for the part of the morning that mattered. 3 days at his northern holding at Calvert Holt, settling a dispute between 2 tenants over a strip of water meadow neither of them in justice owned. And he had ridden out of the bailiff's yard at 3 in the morning, because the conversation he had refused to have at supper would otherwise have resumed at breakfast. Tall, broad through the shoulder, dark-haired, grey-eyed, Theodore Calvert was 28, Duke since his father's last winter 7 years ago. He had been, since the day before yesterday, the holder of a letter from his cousin, Sir Hugh Pelletier Calvert, which advised that his cousin's domestic affairs were on the point of being settled to everyone's satisfaction, including the Duke's own, and which had cost the Duke an hour at his desk, learning that Hugh had bought up a baronet's note in the West Riding and meant to marry the baronet's daughter for it before Michaelmas. The signet had crossed under his thumb 3 times during that hour. He had not yet decided what to do. His horse, a black called Marston, knew the road and was content to walk it at the pace the Duke set. The light was coming up behind them in a way Theodore Calvert recognized, a smear of grey above the moor, no rose in it yet, the first thin line of yellow somewhere east of Tadcaster. The wind was off the moor at his right, smelling of heather and the last cuttings of bracken. The road was empty. The dawn chorus had begun a quarter of an hour ago in the copse he had passed, and would shortly begin again in the next copse ahead. Riding, he turned the matter over. His cousin, and his cousin's note, and the question his cousin had not put to him in the letter, and was certainly going to put to him at Bath in 3 weeks. The signet under his thumb was warm with use. He turned it twice, and stopped turning it, and let Marston have his head into the dip where the road crossed a stream and rose again toward the ridge. It was on the rise out of the stream that he heard the boots on the gravel. Not the gravel of a yard or a drive, the loose stuff of the road, where a turnpike keeper had thrown it down after the August rains. A figure was coming along the road from the west, walking quickly, a bonnet pulled low, and a valise dragging in the right hand. He drew Marston up. The figure was a young woman, by the carriage of her shoulders and the speed of her step, and she had not yet seen him because she was watching the road in front of her boots. He sat very still. Marston, who was a horse of considerable tact, lowered his head and pretended to be a stone. The light came up another half-turn behind the ridge. She was within 20 paces of him when she lifted her face and saw the horse and the rider, and stopped, and her free hand went out a little from her side in the gesture of a woman who has been measuring distances all night and has just been asked to measure one more. "I beg your pardon," she said. Her voice was clear and not loud, and it shook only once on the second syllable of pardon, and she steadied it before he could decide whether he had heard the shake or imagined it. "I am bound for the Black Horse at Ferrybridge. I have business in Bath. I shall not detain you." Theodore Calvert had been instructed in his hour at the library desk by a small inner voice he did not entirely trust to mind his own affairs. He minded them now. He looked at the young woman on the road, at the valise that was clearly too heavy for her, at the bonnet ribbon she had tied so tight it had marked her throat, at the right glove that had been stitched at the palm in a hand which was not the hand of a lady's maid, and at the breast pocket of her travelling pelisse, where a folded letter was making a square he could see from where he sat. He thought of his cousin Hugh's note on the Hartwell estate, and of his cousin Hugh's penciled hand at the foot of the last paragraph. The young woman is 26, and not, in my view, given to defiance. He thought of his cousin's hand at 16, opening a door for him in a corridor in Christchurch, and he thought of the price of that door. A price he had been paying his cousin in small installments for 12 years. He took his thumb off the signet ring. "You are some way from Ferrybridge," he said. He did not dismount. She would not have liked it if he had. 7 miles. The mail does not stop before 5:30. May I ask whether you have a guide?" "I have my feet," she said, "and a passable sense of direction." "Both excellent," he said, "and neither sufficient. Will you allow my groom to take you up? He is some quarter of a mile behind with the carriage. You will reach the inn by 5, in some warmth, and in time." She looked at him. The light had risen enough by now for him to see her eyes. Hazel, set deep, the lashes dark, and a small, straight scar above the right brow, which he did not look at twice, because he had been brought up not to. She was beautiful in the way a great aunt of his had once called bird-bone beautiful, the kind of beauty that survived weather. She was not, at this moment, smiling. "I do not know you, sir," she said. "No," he said, "you do not, and you will be in less danger from me at a distance of 15 paces, in the dawn, than you would be in any other arrangement I can presently devise. My groom is 58 years old, has been in my family's service since before I was born, and would walk 5 miles barefoot through November rather than allow any harm to come to a woman in his carriage. If you would prefer to refuse, I shall ride ahead and tell the keeper at the Black Horse to expect you on foot." She considered him. He saw her consider him. She had a way of holding her chin a fraction lower when she was making up her mind, the way a clerk holds a quill above a ledger before committing to a column. The light came up further. Somewhere behind him on the road, he could hear his groom now, the slow, steady wheels of the travelling carriage at the pace old Harkness preferred. 3 miles to the hour, no faster, never slower. "I shall be obliged," she said, "if your groom will take me up. I shall pay him for the inconvenience." "My groom does not accept payment for civilities," Theodore Calvert said. "He will, however, accept a thank you if it is offered. I am Calvert." "Hartwell," she said. "Miss Hartwell, of—" and then she stopped, because she had been about to say of Hartwell Park in this parish, and had remembered halfway through the second syllable that she was no longer of any such place. "Of Yorkshire," she said instead. "Lately of Yorkshire." "Miss Hartwell," he said, and tipped his hat to her. Only a half-inch. Only the gesture a stranger offers a lady on a road at dawn, and turned Marston aside so she might walk past him toward the carriage already rounding the bend behind. He watched her go. He had seen enough at one glance to know that his cousin's penciled note had been wrong on its single point of evidence. The young woman was 26, and was given, evidently, to defiance. He turned the signet once with his thumb and stopped, and let Marston move on. Harkness pulled up the carriage on the level. He was a stout, plain Yorkshireman, of an age which did not look like an age, 60 by birth, 40 by countenance, eternal by manner. He had been the Duke's groom since the Duke had been a child small enough to require lifting on and off a pony. He took one look at Miss Hartwell on the road, one look at the valise, and one look at his master, without his master having spoken a syllable, and was down off the box and folding the carriage step before she had reached him. "Ma'am," Harkness said, "up you go. Mind the step. The offside spring took a knock at Weatherby, and I have not had it seen to. There you are. Mind your bonnet. The seat will not bite you. The seat opposite will, but only if you provoke it. Where am I taking you?" "The Black Horse at Ferrybridge," she said. She was inside the carriage now, on the forward seat, the valise at her knee. She had not relinquished her grip on its handle. "Ferrybridge," said Harkness, "is no further than my master's breakfast, and breakfast is at the Holt's Gatehouse at 6. We shall have you there well before the mail." He shut the door, climbed up the box, and clicked Marston's pair into motion without further consultation. The carriage moved off. The Duke, who had given his groom no instruction beyond a glance, rode at the carriage's side at a walk, his eyes on the road and not on the window, and thought of his cousin Hugh. Inside the carriage, Imogen Hartwell sat upright on the forward seat, with the valise gripped between her knees. The window faced south, the direction in which her father would, in 3 or 4 hours, wake and ring for his coffee, and a maid would go up to her room and find the curtain caught on the casement bar and the bed unslapped. She measured the inside of the carriage instead. Dark green velvet squabs worn at the corners, leather, beeswax, the faint cedar of shavings against moths. The panel by her right elbow had been painted over so often that the heraldry beneath was now only a shape, a chevron, perhaps, under the dark green. She had told him Hartwell of Yorkshire. He had told her Calvert. The bargain of the dawn was that neither was obliged to be more specific. She did not believe that. She had measured enough of her own life by now to know which of her own promises she could keep. But the believing of it occupied her for the first 3 miles, and that was all she required. Marston, beside the carriage at a walk, snorted once at a pheasant in the hedgerow. The pheasant did not move. The carriage rolled on. The Duke, who had a kind of patience the inside of carriages do not credit, said nothing at all to the window. Harkness, who had a kind of patience nothing in the world could exhaust, clicked his tongue at the off-leader and adjusted the rein and watched the road. The light over the moor turned, by degrees, from grey to the rose his master had not yet remarked. At 5:15, they came over the rise above Ferrybridge, and saw the village laid out below them in its bowl. The bridge over the Aire, the river smoking in the dawn cold, the inn-yard of the Black Horse already lit, 2 ostlers crossing it with lanterns. The Duke leaned in at the window of the carriage with his hat in his hand. "Miss Hartwell," he said, "we shall be in the inn-yard in 5 minutes. Will you allow me to send my groom in for your ticket? It is, forgive me, a small civility, but it spares you the necessity of standing at the booking clerk's desk under your own name." She had not thought of that. She could feel her face register the fact, and she set her jaw against the registering before he could see it. He saw it anyway. He did not remark on it. "I shall be obliged," she said. "The name of Mrs. Hartington of Otley will serve. My great-aunt in Bath will be expecting it on the parcels." "Mrs. Hartington of Otley," the Duke said. "It shall be done." He paused. "May I beg a single piece of information before Harkness goes in?" "You may ask." He let his eyes rest for a half-second on the strap of her valise, where the leather had cracked at the buckle. "The gentleman whose name is on the article you are not, this morning, prepared to be, does he know that you are bound for Bath, or does he believe you to be still at home?" She looked at him through the window. The light caught his face. Grey eyes set wide apart, a straight nose with a faint mark across the bridge as though broken at school, a mouth set in the line of a man not asking for his own amusement. The signet ring on his right hand moved a quarter turn. He stopped it. "He believes," she said, "that I am still at home. He will know otherwise by 10 o'clock. "Then you have until 10 o'clock, the Duke said. "It is enough. I'm obliged for the candour, Miss Hartwell." He drew his head back from the window, gave a brief instruction to Harkness, and rode on into the inn-yard at the side of the chariot. He did not look back at her window. She, having no one to be observed by, watched his back as the chariot rolled into the yard. Harkness handed her down at the inn door with the same matter-of-fact authority with which he had handed her up. He left her in the keeping of the inn's parlour-maid, a girl who asked no questions because Harkness had spoken in her ear first. He returned in 3 minutes with a paper ticket from the booking clerk and an inquiry from the Duke as to whether Mrs. Hartington of Otley would consent to a hot breakfast in the small parlour before the mail came on at 5:20. She would. She was led through to the small parlour, where a fire had been kindled and a tray was already on the table. Toast, butter, hot chocolate, an egg in a cup, and where the Duke stood with his back to the fire and gestured her to the chair. "Mrs. Hartington," he said, "the egg is fresh. The chocolate is from a tin Harkness keeps against just such emergencies. The toast is, I regret, the kitchen's responsibility, not mine. Will you sit?" She sat. She had not eaten since 6 the previous evening. She had not been able to eat at the supper table, where her father had read aloud the announcement Sir Hugh Calvert intended to send to the Bath Chronicle, and the smell of the chocolate was suddenly the only thing in the room. She picked up the cup. She drank. She picked up the toast. "You are kind," she said. "I am unable, this morning, to be as gracious as I should like." "You are quite gracious enough," the Duke said. He did not sit. He stood with his back to the fire, arms folded, watching the door rather than her. "If I may, while you eat. The mail to York leaves in 10 minutes. The through coach to Bath does not run today. You will lose a day at Doncaster. I have business in the south this week. I shall go down today by my own carriage, at a steady pace, and shall reach Bath on Friday. If you would accept a seat in the chariot, as far as Lady Adela Crowburn's house in the Royal Crescent. Yes, I know the lady. She was my mother's cousin. You would be there sooner, and not required to give your name to a booking clerk." I shall ride. Harkness will drive. Refuse, if you wish. The mail leaves in 10 minutes. She set the toast down. She looked at him for a long moment. She thought of her great-aunt's handwriting. Come to me. Come at once. Do not write again from that house. And of the chariot, that was not a posting chaise, but a private one of the heavy, old-fashioned make. And of the signet he turned with his thumb when he was thinking. Mr. Calvert, she said, I do not know you. I have spent the last 6 weeks learning that a name is not, in itself, a recommendation. Will you tell me, without flourish, why you are taking the trouble? He uncrossed his arms. He set his hands at his back. He looked at her, very straight, for a moment in which she could hear the kitchen door open at the back of the inn, and the parlour-maid laugh at something an ostler had said. Then he gave her, with no flourish, the single sentence he had owed himself since the moment he had first seen her on the road. The single sentence she would not understand the cost of until much later. Because the gentleman whose name you are not, this morning, prepared to be, he said, is my cousin. And because I have owed him, for 12 years, a debt I am no longer prepared to pay. The mail came in at 5:18. She heard the guard's horn from the road, and the rattle of the wheels under the inn gate, and the ostlers calling to each other in the yard. She had eaten the egg. She had drunk the chocolate. She had not, since he spoke that single sentence, lifted her eyes from the table. Now she lifted them. Mr. Calvert, she said. You are not a mister. He set his cup down on the small mahogany table at the window and did not look away from her. No, he said, I am not. You are the Duke of Wraithmore. He inclined his head, the gesture economical. I am. She set her napkin beside her plate, not quite carefully enough. The linen caught the corner of the egg cup and turned it a quarter rotation. She set the cup straight with the second finger of her right hand. And was it a coincidence, she said, that put you on the Great North Road at 4 in the morning a week before your cousin meant to put me in his carriage? It was not, in the larger sense, a coincidence. I had been to Calvert Holt to consider whether I could prevent him. I had not, this morning, found the means. Your wisteria appears to have furnished it. My wisteria, she said. He inclined his head a fraction. Outside, the road unrolled past the window at 3 miles to the hour, and the hedge on the near side was beaded white with frost where the sun had not yet reached. I beg your pardon. I have no manner of right to that observation. The wisteria is your business. You have, she said, and there was the faintest flicker at one corner of her mouth. Not a smile, exactly, but the place a smile would have stood if she had been any less tired. No manner of right to anything you have done this morning, Your Grace, and you have done it anyway. I shall ride to Bath in the chariot. I am obliged. She turned the corner of her glove between her thumb and forefinger, and did not look at him while she did it. The obligation, she said, is mine. I do not pretend otherwise. I shall remember it. You owe me nothing. If at any point between here and Bath you wish to be set down, lift the hammer in the roof. Harkness will stop within the half-mile. You will be set down with your valise and 4 guineas for the next stage. The 4 guineas are not a charity. They are a precaution. Do not, I beg you, refuse them on a point of pride. I shall not refuse them. I shall return them to you in Bath, with interest at 5%. 5% over 4 days, he said, is rather under 3pence. For the first time since the wharf, the corner of his mouth lifted by a fraction that he did not allow to become a smile. Then I shall add the 3pence to your hand, sir, on the steps of Lady Adela Crowburn's house in the Royal Crescent. Do not, on a point of pride, refuse it. He looked at her. He was, she noticed for the first time, not a man who smiled often, and the look he gave her was not a smile, but it was something nearer to a smile than the expressions she had collected from him on the road. He bowed. I shall not, on any point, refuse you, he said. Harkness will tell you when to come down to the yard. Will you finish the toast? I shall finish the toast. He left her. The fire crackled. The parlour maid came in for the tray and went out again with it. Imogen Hartwell sat in front of an empty plate in a small parlour at the Black Horse in Ferrybridge on the morning of the 17th of September, with one valise at her feet, 4 extra guineas in her purse, a ticket made out to a name she would not now use, and a seat in the private chariot of the Duke of Wraithmore, who was the cousin of the man she had climbed out of her window to escape. She put her face into her hands for the count of 3 breaths, the longest interval she had allowed herself in 3 years, and then lifted her face out of them and stood up. The chariot rolled out of the inn-yard at 5:25. Harkness on the box, the Duke on Marston at the offside wheel, Miss Hartwell in the forward seat in the corner that did not face the road behind her. The dawn lifted off the moor at last and went grey-gold over the river, and the toll-keeper at the south gate touched his cap to a chariot that passed him often enough that he did not need to read the panel, and the road ran down toward Doncaster, between the hedges that the air winds about for 9 miles below the bridge. For the first hour of that road, she did not speak. He did not require her to. She watched the hedgerows, and the small things in them. A lark lifting out of the grass on the verge, a stoat at a long lope across the Cale, a labourer at a gate who watched the carriage pass without acknowledging it. She thought about her mother's miniature in her breast pocket. She thought about her great-aunt in Bath. She thought, against her will, about the man riding at the offside wheel. She had not asked him a single question about himself. She had not, even, asked the question she ought to have been asking first. What, precisely, was the nature of the debt he had owed his cousin for 12 years? And what did he propose to do about it now? She had not asked because she suspected the answers would change the temperature in the carriage, and she was not, at this moment, prepared for further changes of temperature. At 9 o'clock they pulled up at the Cock at Doncaster for the horses. Harkness was down off the box and at the chariot door with the step before any ostler reached them. The Duke came round to the door himself. "Miss Hartwell, there is a parlour at the back. The landlady is a woman of sense, who has put up 4 of my mother's nieces in her time. Will you go in for a half-hour? Harkness needs to change his off-leader. I have ordered a tray." "You order trays," she said, with the regularity of a man who has done it before. "I order trays," he said, "because the alternative is conversation in inn-yards, and I have not, your Grace's pardon, the conversation for an inn-yard at 9 o'clock in the morning." The corner of her mouth lifted at your Grace's pardon, the precise self-mockery of a duke calling his own mistake by his own title, and she did not allow it to lift further. She went into the parlour. She drank tea. She came out again. The chariot moved on at 10:15. By midday they were at Bawtry. By 2 they were on the road to Newark. The Duke, who had ridden Marston for 6 hours, dismounted at Newark, sent the horse on with Harkness to the next stage, and took, for the first time, the seat opposite hers inside the chariot. "I shall ride again at Stamford," he said. "I do not, in general, ride inside. I am told the conversation is the better for it. Whether the conversation will, today, justify the report, is a matter on which I cannot, at the moment, undertake to speak." She had her hands folded over the valise. She did not know quite what to do with a man at the opposite seat of a carriage who proposed to be conversational. She decided that the simplest course was to be conversational back. "Your Grace," she said, "the chevron under the paint of this carriage." He looked at the panel. He looked at her. "Argent, on a chevron sable, 3 crescents, or," he said, "it has not been picked out in 3 reigns. The chariot belonged to my grandfather. My father had it painted over when he succeeded. I have not had the heart to have it picked out again, or the philosophy to have it stripped. The result is, at present, the worst of both choices." She turned the page in her own mind for a moment before she answered. "A chevron and 3 crescents," she said. "My father had a book of heraldry in his library. I read it at 12 because I had nothing else to do that winter. Calvert of Wraithmore. 3 crescents for the 3 crusades the second Earl did not attend. He did not attend them, the Duke said, because he was prevented by gout. The crescents are aspirational. The motto is Bene promissum solvitur bene. A promise well made is well discharged, which has been the family curse for some 4 centuries. It seems, she said carefully, an honourable curse. The Duke looked at the floor between them for a beat before he answered. It is the curse of any family that has not yet learned to refuse a promise at the outset. We are, as a clan, very good at paying and very poor at declining. My cousin Hugh has made an art of accepting promises from Calverts. She felt the carriage take a small jolt over a place in the road where the surface had broken in the August rain. The valise shifted under her hand. She steadied it. "Will you tell me," she said, without flourish, "the nature of the promise you have owed him for 12 years? He did not answer at once. He looked out of the window. The fields ran past. Barley stubble, a hawthorn hedge, a flock of pigeons that lifted from the stubble in one breath and resettled in another. When he spoke, his voice was the voice of a man reading a clause out of a ledger he had read often enough to have it by heart. "I was 16, he said. I was at school. I had borrowed a horse without permission and ridden it lame. The man whose horse it was had been at school with my father and would have written to him. And my father, 3 months in a sickbed at the Holt, would have read the letter as the last thing in his life. He died 6 weeks later. Hugh, 3 years my elder, settled the matter with a bank draft drawn on a Wraithmore account he did not have authority over. He produced it for me to sign. I signed. The man was paid. My father was spared. The 140 guineas were never the debt. The debt was that Hugh had spared my father a piece of news in the last 6 weeks of his life. That debt was made by Hugh, paid by Hugh, and rendered from that day irretrievable in coin." There was a pause. His glance crossed her face briefly and returned to the window. "For 12 years, he said, Hugh has, by reference to that incident in tones which never quite name it, secured from me whatever indulgence he required. I have signed papers I should not have signed. I have refused to look at his ledgers when, as holder of his trust under our grandfather's will, I had every right to demand them. Last week I learned, from an old steward at the Holt, that he had purchased your father's note at 6 shillings on the pound from a creditor in Leeds, had had your father sign articles of betrothal in exchange for cancellation, and had assured me in a private letter that the daughter was 26 and not given to defiance. I came north to find a means of preventing it. I had not, in 3 days, found one. You appear to have prevented it without my assistance." She watched the fire shift on the hearth before she spoke. "I have not," she said quietly, "yet prevented anything. I have only put 87 paces between myself and his settlement, and the 87 paces will not in themselves hold." "They will hold," he said, "until Bath. After that they will require more than your great-aunt. Lady Crowburn is formidable. She is not, against my cousin in a court of chancery, sufficient. He has your father's hand on the note and on the articles. He will produce them, in the Bath Chronicle by Tuesday week, in his solicitor's chambers the Tuesday following, in a public action in due course. He has not, at any point, broken the law as it presently stands." "Then what," she said, "do you mean to do?" The signet under his thumb went round once and stopped. "I mean," he said, "to discharge a promise I have not, in 12 years, found the courage to refuse. I mean to tell my cousin, in writing and in his own hand, that the debt for which I have stood paying him in installments since the autumn of 1802 is, this morning, paid in full, and in coin he will not have expected. I mean to tell him that any further claim he makes on it shall be heard, by the family at large, as the second-rate piece of moral coinage it has, in fact, always been." He stopped. He turned the signet ring with his thumb. He stopped turning it. "It is," he said, The discharge that I have, for 12 years, owed myself, and not him. He is, in this matter, the occasion. He is not, in any deeper sense, the cause. She did not answer. She watched his hand. After a moment, he became aware that she was watching, and laid his hand flat on his knee. "Forgive me," he said. "I have a habit with the ring. It has been the cause of several lectures from elderly aunts." "You wear it on your right hand," she said, "which is unusual." He spread the hand on the arm of his chair and looked at the ring as if from outside it. "I wear it on my right hand because I write with my left. I have, since I was a boy, found it an inconvenience to ink my own signet. My father wore his on his right hand for the same reason. My grandfather, by all accounts, wore his on a chain. There is no orthodoxy, I find, in any branch of family practice that can stand up to half an hour's inquiry." "I find," she said, "that to be the truth of family practice in general." And she let the corner of her mouth lift again, and did not check it this time. They reached Stamford after dark. He rode again from Stamford. She slept, for 2 hours, in the carriage, sitting upright in the corner. They lay that night at the George at Witham Common, where Harkness had sent word ahead, and where Lady Crowburn's old housekeeper, pensioned at the George 10 years before, had been roused at 11 to wait on Miss Hartwell at her room. They slept. They rose at 5. They went south. It was on the second day of that journey, between Witham Common and Stilton, that she put to him a question she had not, in 12 hours of intermittent conversation, found the words for. "Your Grace," she said. The morning light was, this time, behind them. She could see his face plainly across the carriage. "When you said, at the Black Horse, that you had owed him a debt you were no longer prepared to pay, you did not say, then, the nature of the discharge." "No," he said. She set her cup down with care on the table at her elbow. "You have said it now. The discharge is a letter you mean to write him. A letter and a refusal." "Yes." "Is it sufficient?" He looked at her. He looked, for the first time, as a man looks at another man across a desk on which a matter of business has been laid out. "It is sufficient," he said, "to free me. It is not, I am afraid, sufficient to free you. Your father's hand on the note remains. The articles of betrothal remain. My cousin's claim, in the eyes of the law, is good. He will press it. He will press it the harder for my refusal. He will press it because he will conceive himself, in some half-articulate way, betrayed." "Then," she said, "the question is not whether you discharge your own debt. The question is whether, in discharging it, you make my position worse." "It is exactly that question. I have considered it for 2 days. I have not, yet, an answer that contents me." She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. "Tell me," she said, "the answer that does not content you." He smiled. Actually smiled this time. A small, fractional smile that lasted a quarter of a second, and went again, and inclined his head. "The answer that does not content me," he said, "is that I write the letter to my cousin from Bath, in your great-aunt's house, and undertake to stand at your side in any public action he may bring. The articles are attacked in Chancery, on the ground that they were procured by undue pressure, on a man your father, in his present state, undoubtedly is. The action takes a year. You live, that year, under Lady Crowburn's roof. At the end of it you are released from the articles, and your reputation is the better for the matter having gone in your favour." "It is an admirable plan," she said. He turned the ring round once. The fire shifted on the hearth. "It does not content me," he said, "because I cannot, with any honesty, propose it to you without telling you that the alternative my cousin will, in the first instance, propose, is the alternative which would settle the matter in a fortnight." "And that alternative is?" He looked at her quite steadily. He had stopped, she noticed, even the habit with the ring. That alternative, he said, is that the Duke of Wraithmore undertakes, in his own person, to discharge my cousin's claim by a settlement. The settlement requires that I marry, in the first place, the lady on whom the claim stands. It transfers the matter from a cousin who has bought a note to a duke who has made an offer. My cousin cannot, in the family, refuse it without appearing thwarted in a matter of pride. The matter is closed by Michaelmas. The carriage took another jot. The valise did not move under her hand, because her hand was, in fact, no longer on the valise. Her hand was flat against the wall of the carriage, where she had put it without intending to. "Your Grace," she said, "you are proposing—" "I am proposing," he said. "Nothing whatever. I am laying before you the two alternatives, because they are the two I have been able to construct between Stamford and Stilton, and because the second is, on every point of efficiency, the better. I am not, and I beg you to hear this, I am not proposing it as the better." She held his eye. She did not look away. "On what point," she said very carefully, "is the second not the better?" "On the point," he said, "that it asks of you, in the discharge of a debt my cousin has imposed against your will, an instrument you should not have to use. To be married to me, to be free of him, is a freedom of a poor kind. I have known you for 32 hours. I do not know whether you laugh at things, and if you do, at what. The first alternative does not require me to know any of that. The second requires that you tell me, on Friday, at Lady Crowburn's fireside, whether the answer would make the second tolerable." She did not speak. She drew her hand back from the wall of the carriage. She set it again on the valise. She watched, without seeing, a hedge of late blackberry pass the window. "I am being," he said, "less than gallant. I am asking, in the same breath in which I name a marriage of convenience, that you allow me 36 hours more conversation to determine whether it would, in fact, be a convenience to you. I beg your pardon for it. The want of the proper form is, this morning, the least of my embarrassments." She found that she was, for the second time in the journey, laughing. A small, half-painful laugh, the laugh of a woman who has been measuring distances all night and has just discovered the measurement is, in this instance, smaller than she had feared. The laugh surprised her. It surprised him. He inclined his head a fraction. "I am gratified," he said, "that one of us, at least, finds the matter capable of mirth." She watched him a moment, with the corner of her mouth quite still. "I find," she said, "that any matter is capable of mirth, if a man can propose a marriage of convenience in the same sentence in which he confesses he does not know whether the proposed bride laughs at things. Your Grace, let us, until Friday, set the second alternative aside, and discuss only the first." "As you wish." She took up her cup and held it without drinking. "On Friday, I shall tell you whether I find the second tolerable. In the interval, I beg you do not, by any of your habits, treat me as though I have, this morning, taken your second alternative on advisement. Treat me as you would treat a Miss Hartwell, whom you had handed up at Ferrybridge, with no other intention than that of taking her to Bath. I am not, this morning, an offer. I am a passenger." "You are a passenger," he said gravely, "and you have, to my certain knowledge, paid no fare. Harkness, who keeps the accounts of this carriage, will, I am afraid, send a bill." She set the cup down at last, and laced her fingers together in her lap. "Harkness," she said, "may send the bill to my great-aunt. She has been waiting 6 years to settle accounts with you for the chocolate tin you sent her at Christmas in 1808, which she pronounced, on opening, to contain only sawdust." "It contained," he said with dignity, "a fragment of marchpane pressed into the form of a chocolate tin by an artisan in Brook Street, which she ate in due course with cream." The Duke looked at the rug between them. The candle on the small table flickered once and steadied. "She has," Imogen Hartwell said, "never quite forgiven you." "She never quite," the Duke said, "forgives anyone. It is the basis of her affection. They came into Bath on the Friday afternoon, by the London road, under a sky that had not made up its mind. The Crescent stood pale and grand under thin cloud. Lady Adela Crowburn's house was the 7th from the western end. The chariot pulled up. Harkness was at the step. The Duke handed her down. Lady Crowburn's footman opened the door before the bell had been rung, because Lady Crowburn had been at the window for the past quarter of an hour. She was at the door herself the moment Imogen was inside it. Lady Adela Crowburn was 73, small, with a face that had once been beautiful and had since become better, and a pair of eyes which examined Imogen without softening, and then softened entirely. She took her great-niece's face between two thin, gloved hands, turned it by half an inch to the lamp, and looked again. Then she said, in the dry tone of a Bath dowager who has waited 6 years for this interview and was not going to waste it on weeping, "You have your mother's chin, and none of her sense, child. But the chin will serve. Wraithmore, come in. Mrs. Lane will take Miss Hartwell up. I have had the front room prepared since Monday. You and I shall have words in the library when she is settled, and you may save the Northumberland holding for tomorrow. I have heard it this morning from your steward by post, and have, at present, no patience for it." "You have," the Duke said, bowing. "No patience for anything, Lady Crowburn." "I have," she said, "patience for the right people in the right order. Get inside before the neighbours see you and form opinions. The neighbours in this Crescent form opinions in a manner I find embarrassing on the dead's behalf." The library was lit, and a fire was in. Mrs. Lane took Imogen up to the front room on the first floor, where a bath had been drawn and a maid was waiting. Imogen, in the doorway of a bedchamber she had not slept in for 13 years, set the valise on the floor and put her hands flat on a chair to steady herself. The chair was upholstered in pale blue silk. The bed curtains were the same. A fire of small coals was burning in the grate. The window faced south over the back garden of the Crescent, where a magnolia she remembered from her 13th summer was already dropping its first leaves. She did not move for the count of 5 breaths. Then she straightened, undressed, washed, put on the wrapper Mrs. Lane had laid on the bed, and sat in the chair by the fire. She did not cry. The crying, she had decided somewhere south of Newark, was a luxury for which she was not, this week, going to find time. Downstairs, in the library, Lady Crowburn poured the Duke a glass of Madeira at her own decanter, sat down opposite him, and put her chin into her hand. "Wraithmore," she said. "Begin." "Lady Crowburn," he said, "I have brought your niece to Bath. The remainder will keep until tomorrow. She has not slept, except in fragments in the carriage, since Sunday night. She has been holding her face in a particular way for 33 hours, which has cost her more than she yet knows. I came in here to tell you that, and to drink 1 glass of Madeira at your decanter, rather than at any of the Crescent's 7 others, because I find I prefer the company. After which I shall remove myself to the Christopher, and we shall meet again at noon tomorrow." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she nodded. "Quite right," she said. "She is not, this evening, an item of business. You may have the 2nd glass before you go, on the same understanding. I shall, when you are gone, send Mrs. Lane up to her with a posset. She will sleep on the posset. She will sleep tonight because she has not yet, in her own estimate, permitted herself to, and because Mrs. Lane is not a woman one refuses. Have you a plan for tomorrow?" He set his glass down with deliberation. "I have," he said, "2 plans. I shall lay them before her at noon. I shall lay them before her, that is, in your presence. I beg the indulgence of your fireside for the conversation. You shall have it. You shall have it the better for not having, at any point this evening, attempted to lay them before me first. Wraithmore, you are not the boy you were at 20. I should have written to you sooner. I did not, and I have this evening learned otherwise." He looked at her then, and the look held a moment longer than her aunt's clock allowed for. "I am," he said, "still a slow-thinking creature. I had, however, on this particular question, 12 years' rumination behind me. Hugh Pelletier, Lady Crowburn said, the corner of her mouth folding in, is a creature your grandfather should have strangled at the font, and would have, had he not been laid up with gout that morning. He has been waiting for this hour since he was 19 years old. I shall lend you, tomorrow, the woman I keep in Bristol for the purpose. The purpose being? Lady Crowburn lifted her glass and tilted it against the firelight. The purpose being, she said, the management of disgraced cousins. She is a solicitor's widow of remarkable acuity. She has, in her time, settled 3 of these matters. She shall come up by Monday's coach. In the interval, you will, tomorrow, lay your plans before my niece in this room, and you will not, while I am alive in this room, allow yourself any species of plan which proposes to spend my niece's reputation as the principal currency of the transaction. Are we clear, Wraithmore? We are, Lady Crowburn. Drink your Madeira, Lady Crowburn said, and go away. He drank it. He went. The fire in the library burned low. Mrs. Lane took up the posset. Imogen drank it. She slept 12 hours, which she had not done in the 3 years since her mother's first decline. She woke at 20 to 10, with sunlight on the magnolia leaves and a bowl of hot chocolate steaming beside her bed, and she lay quite still for a moment, watching the steam. By noon, she was in the library. The Duke was in the chair he had sat in the night before. Lady Crowburn was at the writing table, with a sheaf of papers and a pair of spectacles she did not admit to owning. The fire was lit. The room smelled of beeswax, and the lavender Mrs. Lane laid in all the linen of the house. He laid the 2 plans before her with the precision of a man who had had 2 days to choose his sentences. The first was the Chancery suit. The second was the marriage. He did not advocate either. He listed, on each, the cost to her, to him, to Lady Crowburn, and to Hartwell Park, where her father would require some arrangement either way. He sat. He waited. Lady Crowburn took off her spectacles and laid them on the writing table. Well, she said, Wraithmore has done the thing properly. Imogen, you have heard the alternatives. I shall not speak for you. I shall, however, speak twice on small adjacent matters. The first is that the Chancery suit, conducted from this house in the names I have at my disposal, can be brought to a satisfactory verdict in 14 months, without leaving you a worse name in Bath than the one your great-uncle left me. The second is that the marriage, if you entertain it, is not a marriage to a man you have known for 32 hours. It is a marriage to a man whose mother was at my wedding. I have observed the breed for 62 years. Wraithmore is a slow creature, and a stubborn creature, and a creature who at 16 signed a paper he should not have signed, and has been paying for it ever since at compounded interest. I shall not, on his behalf, recommend him. I shall, on my own behalf, tell you that I do not throw open my decanter at the first chime of a Calvert footstep, and that the decanter was open last night. Now I shall walk in the garden. She walked in the garden. The library door closed. The fire crackled. Miss Hartwell, he said, take your time. I shall, for the avoidance of doubt, sit at the desk and write a letter that requires writing in any case, and you may speak when you choose. He sat at the desk. He wrote. The pen moved unhurried over the paper. She watched him write for the count of 20 breaths. Your Grace, she said, if I take the Chancery alternative, what becomes of my father? I have, he said without looking up, instructed my own steward at the Holt to ride to Hartwell Park within the week and make an offer for the standing timber on the South Plantation. The offer is fair. The proceeds, paid to your father's solicitor, will discharge the arrears and the smaller note. Your father will not, in this lifetime, be put out of his own house. He may, in any event, see no further winter. And if I take the second alternative? The same arrangement obtains. The timber is yours as part of the settlement. So is the small farm at Lower Bedale your great-uncle left you, which Hugh would have annexed. My solicitor has been at the Court of Chancery in Leeds since Wednesday, ensuring it does not. So is... He stopped, set the pen down, and turned. Miss Hartwell, I am drifting into a ledger which has no business being read aloud. I shall stop. You shall not stop, she said. You shall finish the column. He finished it. He named, in a level voice, the small parcels of property which the marriage would, by operation of law, secure to her. The Bedale farm, a Norfolk holding of which she had not known, 3,000 settled at her sole disposal, and a separate provision for her father's man of business. He laid the ledger down. He looked at her. It is, he said, an honest accounting. It is also the second best argument I can put before you. The third best is that I find I have begun, in the last 40 hours, to imagine that you might, at some point in the year, laugh again at something I had said. And I have not, in 3 or 4 years, had occasion to imagine such a thing. I am laying out the books, because the books are the part of the proposal which is unanswerable. I am laying them out, also, because I cannot lay out the other thing, which is that the books are not why I am asking. She looked at the fire. The coals shifted. Lady Crowburn, in the garden, was speaking to a gardener about a magnolia branch. A cab passed in the crescent. Somewhere on the floor above, Mrs. Lane was crossing a room. Your Grace, she said, I shall take the Chancery. She watched his face. He did not move. He did not register the answer. Only the small, fractional smile she had seen once before passed across his mouth and was gone. You shall take the Chancery, he said. Good. I have been hoping you should. You have been hoping? He turned the signet round once, and let her wait the time it took. I have been hoping, he said, that you would refuse the second alternative on the only ground it could honorably be refused on, that you do not yet know whether you wish to marry me. You do not. I do not, on my side, wish to be married to a woman who is taking me to be free of my cousin. The Chancery is the longer road. It is the better road. We shall walk it. At the end of it we may, if the question is still open between us, find we have other matters to discuss. Your Grace. He held her gaze a beat without smiling. Theo, he said, or Calvert. The other has, this week, done sufficient duty. Theo, she said carefully, on trial. The word felt strange. The word also felt entirely natural. She set it aside for later examination. I shall remember that Chancery is the longer road. I shall remember also that I have not yet refused the second alternative, only postponed it. I shall, he said gravely, remember the postponement. Lady Crowburn came in from the garden with a magnolia leaf in her hand, and dust on her glove, and a look of mild satisfaction on her face, which she did not undertake to explain. She poured 3 glasses of sherry. They drank. The Chancery was begun the following Tuesday, in the chambers of Lady Crowburn's Bristol solicitor's widow, whose name was Mrs. Holroyd, and whose acuity proved equal to the report of it. The autumn moved. The pump-room opened its season. Lady Crowburn took her great-niece in on the 4th morning of October. They were observed. Imogen had decided, somewhere south of Doncaster, that the observation might as well be made use of. She wore the gowns Lady Crowburn's dressmaker had run up in 3 days, a green merino, a saffron silk, a deep indigo. And Lady Crowburn presented her as a great niece come for the autumn, and the polite world drew its own conclusions, and did not draw the conclusion Sir Hugh Calvert would have preferred. Sir Hugh Calvert came down from London on the 11th of October. He took rooms at the York House. He sent up his card to Lady Crowburn's door 3 times in the first week. Lady Crowburn was, on each occasion, not at home. He stood at the doorway of the octagon and watched, across 2 rows of card tables, his cousin the Duke at Miss Hartwell's chair, discussing with her a matter which was not, by any feature visible from the doorway, a Chancery matter. He drummed 2 fingers twice against the lintel and went out into Milsom Street. The following morning, he sent a letter to the editor of the Bath Chronicle, setting out the existence of an article of betrothal signed by a baronet of the West Riding, and noting that the lady named therein was residing under the roof of a great-aunt whose hospitality his cousin appeared to find unusually congenial. The letter was not published. The editor had a long-standing arrangement with Lady Crowburn and sent it on to her by his clerk. Lady Crowburn passed it to Mrs. Holroyd. Mrs. Holroyd lifted her chin a quarter inch and replied within the hour that the matter would be filed as evidence of attempted public injury to a litigant whose case was before the court. 3 further letters arrived in the next 5 days. Each was filed. None was published. Sir Hugh, who knew when an avenue had been closed against him, walked on the 22nd of October to the pump room and saw, across the room, Miss Imogen Hartwell, laughing at something an old admiral was telling her, with his cousin the Duke at her elbow, examining the cuff of his own coat in the manner of a man resolved not to look at the lady beside him in public. Sir Hugh did not cross the room. He went out along the parade. It was on the parade, near the steps that descend to the river, that Imogen, returning from the milliner's, with Mrs. Lane carrying her parcels behind, saw something she had not expected. Through the iron palings of the small private garden behind the York House, in the cold yellow light of a Bath autumn at 4 o'clock, Sir Hugh Pelletier Calvert stood alone at a stone bench in the far corner. He had taken from an inner pocket a small, flat object. He held it on the flat of his hand and turned it with his thumb. Not as a man looks at a paper, but as a man looks at a thing he has been carrying for a long time and has, today, found himself unable to put down. The object was a small, enamelled miniature in a silver oval. He passed his thumb across the painted face once, twice. His face, the face Imogen had seen in 3 rooms across 2 years, with no expression but cold transaction, had altered. For the count of 5 breaths, he looked like a man whose private grief had found him unprepared in a garden. A magpie crossed the path between the bench and the river. Imogen stepped back 1 pace, and another, and turned, and walked on toward the crescent with Mrs. Lane behind her, without ever having spoken or been seen. She told no one. She did not name it to herself that evening either. She knew only that the man she had climbed out of her window to escape was carrying, in his unwatched moments, the face of someone whose loss had marked him in a way the public man did not know how to bear. She did not soften toward him. She knew only that the fact altered the shape of what she would, in the end, do with him. That was a Monday. On the Thursday morning of the same week, he came to Lady Crowburn's door. Mrs. Holroyd was already in the library when his card came up. She had brought the second packet of papers in the Chancery suit, and had been laying them before Imogen for the better part of an hour. Lady Crowburn had been called away to a tenant at the kitchen door. Imogen was alone with Mrs. Holroyd and the packet when the footman brought up the card. She read the card. She set it on the table beside the papers. She looked at Mrs. Holroyd. "He has come," she said, "in the absence of my great-aunt, in the absence of his grace, and with no warning." "He has," said Mrs. Holroyd. "Considered the morning carefully. He has chosen the only morning of the fortnight on which Wraithmore was certain to be at his solicitor's in Bristol, and on which her ladyship was expected to be in the still-room with Mrs. Lane. He has chosen the morning. He has not chosen the room. The room remains yours." "Bring him up," Imogen said. Her hand was, she noticed, quite steady. "Mrs. Holroyd, you shall remain. He shall see you when he comes through the door. He shall see, on the writing table at your right hand, the packet of papers in this morning's submission. He shall not, at any point in this interview, be left in any doubt that the conversation is one his counsel might wish to know of, and that mine is in the room." "Very good, Miss Hartwell." He came up. He was admitted. He bowed at the door. He was, Imogen noticed, in the same coat he had worn at the pump room 3 days before, and the cravat was tied with the same exactness. He was a beautiful man, His cousin had not lied about the family looks, and the beauty, this morning, was somehow more difficult to bear than it had been in any of the rooms at Hartwell. "Miss Hartwell," he said, "I had hoped to find your great aunt." "My great aunt," she said, "is engaged. I have asked Mrs. Holroyd, who acts for me in the present matter, to remain. Will you sit, Sir Hugh?" He sat. He did not register Mrs. Holroyd. He looked at Imogen. "I shall not," he said, "trespass long. I have come, Miss Hartwell, to put to you a proposition, the existence of which my cousin the Duke has, by his recent conduct, made it necessary for me to make at this earlier hour. I had intended to wait until your father's solicitor had been in Bath. I have decided I shall not wait." "You have decided," Imogen said, "a great many things at this earlier hour, Sir Hugh. I am to understand that one of them was the letter to the Bath Chronicle of last Wednesday?" His face did not move. The two-finger drumming did. The two fingers of his right hand tapped, once, against the upholstery of the chair arm. He became aware they had. He stopped. "I am not," he said, "in the habit of explaining my correspondence to its subject. I shall, however, explain it on this occasion. I had been informed that you and the Duke of Wraithmore had been observed—" "Sir Hugh," said Mrs. Holroyd from the writing table, without raising her eyes. "The letter is in the packet at my right elbow. So are the 3 further submissions. So is the editor's note. So is the precedent on procurement of public injury to a litigant in Greenfield v. Bannister, 1807. I shall save you the trouble of the sentence." Sir Hugh did not turn his head toward Mrs. Holroyd. He turned, instead, the smallest possible quarter-inch of his face away from her. He looked, again, at Imogen. "Miss Hartwell," he said, "I shall come directly to it. Your father's hand is on the note for £9,000, and on the article of betrothal. The article is, in the present state of the law, unanswerable. The Chancery action will not succeed. It will occupy a year, at the close of which you shall be a woman of 27 without name and without prospect. Your father shall by then be under a writ of distraint I have it in my power, but not my obligation, to lift. I have come to offer you a discharge of the article and the note in full, on the single condition that you withdraw the Chancery suit and accept the form of marriage your father has consented to in writing. The marriage shall be in form only. You shall reside at such of my estates as you choose. You shall meet me as the appearance of the matter shall require, and at no others." She listened. She let him finish. She did not take her eyes off his face. Mrs. Holroyd, at the writing table, had laid down her papers and was watching also, but not speaking. "Sir Hugh," Imogen said, "you have done me the courtesy of speaking directly. I shall return it. I shall not withdraw the Chancery suit. I shall not, in any form, accept the article. I shall be at my father's bedside in my own name at the end. The writ of distraint shall be a matter Mrs. Holroyd takes up with your creditors. I am refusing your proposition in plain English now. Further communications shall be referred to Mrs. Holroyd's chambers in Queen Square." He sat very still. He was, she noticed, a man whose face did not redden in anger. It whitened. The two fingers of his right hand did not tap again. He stood up. He gave a small, precise bow. "Miss Hartwell," he said, "I shall not, having had your answer, trouble you in this room again." "Sir Hugh," she said, "good morning." He went. The door closed. Mrs. Holroyd lifted her pen. "That," she said quietly, "was very prettily done, Miss Hartwell, if I may. The phrase in plain English will, I believe, find its way into my closing statement at the eventual hearing. You are welcome to it, Mrs. Holroyd." Sir Hugh did not leave Bath that evening. He went to the York House, to his own private rooms, sat at his desk and considered. He had been refused before Mrs. Holroyd's eyes by a woman who had a wisteria stem and a duke's chariot between her and the article she would not now sign. He sat at his desk until the candles guttered. He went at last to his bed, and lay in it without sleeping, and thought, against his will, of a small enamelled miniature in his pocket, which had been, in his life of 37 years, the one true thing. On the same Thursday, the Duke returned from Bristol at 6 in the evening, was met at the Christopher with Mrs. Holroyd's brief account of the interview, and went directly to Lady Crowburn's door. He was admitted to the library. Imogen was there. Lady Crowburn was there. The fire was lit. He sat. He looked, for a long moment, at Imogen. "You should not," he said, "have been alone." "I was not alone. Mrs. Holroyd was at the writing table. Mrs. Holroyd's papers were on the writing table. Sir Hugh did not fail to notice either." He took a breath he did not let her see him taking. "You should not," he said again, "have received him at all." "He came," she said, "in the absence of any of you. He chose his morning. I should have left him on the steps, and he should have written instead, and the writing should have come to Mrs. Holroyd's chambers in any case. I chose to spare the post. I have not, Your Grace, taken any harm." "You have not, Theo?" Lady Crowburn said from the corner. "I beg your pardon," he said. "Theo. You have not, Theo, taken any harm." He smiled. He was, this evening, a tired man. He sat back in the chair and let his head rest against the upholstery. "Tomorrow," he said, "Mrs. Holroyd and I shall sit at the table in Queen's Square at 10, and we shall map the next quarter. He will, I am afraid, not now confine himself to the suit. He will, in the 4 weeks remaining of the season, do as much as the polite world will permit him to do to make your name uncomfortable here. He will, by the new year, have failed. But the 4 weeks shall be the 4 weeks. I would have prevented you from any of this. I cannot." "You did," Imogen said quietly. "Prevent me from a great deal of it. On a road at Ferrybridge. I have not forgotten." He looked at her. He did not say what he would have said. Lady Crowburn, with the dryness of a great aunt who had been observing both of them for the better part of October, rose from her corner. "Wraithmore," she said. "Theo. Calvert. By whatever name you are answering this evening, I am going up to write a letter to a dressmaker in Bristol who, by my information, has been making an indigo silk for the Pelletier half-sister at York House. The order shall, by tomorrow, be cancelled. Sit. Talk. I shall be in the morning room across the landing. Mrs. Lane will bring you each a glass of wine. I shall be back in this room in a quarter of an hour, by which time I expect you, Imogen, to have walked Theo into the garden and shown him the magnolia, which is, this week, a very fine magnolia indeed." She went. The door closed. The fire crackled. They did walk into the garden. Mrs. Lane brought the wine and set the glasses on the small stone table by the magnolia and went away. The afternoon had turned warm with the strange, brief warmth of a Bath October at 5 o'clock, when the cloud breaks and the sun lays a band of gold along the south-facing gardens. The magnolia was nearly bare. One last glossy leaf hung at the end of the lowest branch, turning slowly. The asters beneath were a fierce, late purple. Somewhere in the next garden, a thrush sang the autumn song that thrushes sing in Bath in October, when they have not yet decided whether to go. "I have," Imogen said, "a thing I should like to tell you. It is not the thing you would expect." "I am," the Duke said, "by definition not equipped to expect any particular thing this afternoon. I am at your disposal." "On Monday," she said, "in the back lane behind the York House garden, I saw your cousin, alone, at the stone bench by the river palings. There was no one with him. He was alone, and unobserved as he believed, and he had taken out of his coat pocket a small enamelled miniature of a face I did not see clearly. He turned it in his hand. He passed his thumb across the painted face. He did this for the count of 5 breaths. He stood as a man stands who is carrying, in his pocket, a grief he has not laid down. I did not speak. I did not let him see me. I walked back to the crescent, and I did not tell anyone what I saw. He did not speak. The thrush in the next garden lifted into the autumn song and finished it. My aunt, he said, very quietly. Lavinia. Hugh's mother died in childbirth. My aunt by marriage, my mother's sister, became, in effect, Hugh's mother. He worshipped her. She was beautiful, brilliant, and dead of a brain fever before he was 11. The miniature is hers. He has carried it, by my knowledge, since the autumn of the year she died. I did not know, I should say I did not know, until this moment, that he still carried it. I should have known. She kept her hands folded in her lap. He is, she said, still a man whose article I shall not, on any account, sign. He is. He is also a man, she said, who, when he is alone at 5 in the afternoon in a stone garden at York House, takes out the face of his aunt and weeps without weeping. And I shall not, when I am old, pretend I did not see that. You shall not. I have told you, she said, because I wished you to know that I had seen it, and because I wished, in the next 4 weeks, neither of us to act in the absence of the knowledge of it. He shall lose the Chancery suit. He shall not, in the losing, be unmade in such a way that the man at the stone bench shall be denied the means to go on carrying his miniature. I do not yet know what I mean, in particular, by that sentence. I shall know in time. He looked at her. The Bath sun was on her hair, which was a colour Bath sun finds well. She was, at this moment, the most beautiful woman he had ever seen in any garden. And he did not say so, because she was not, at this moment, a beautiful woman in a garden. She was a serious woman in a garden, and she was working through, in front of him, a piece of moral arithmetic, for which he had himself, in his life, been notable for taking too long. Imogen, he said. The name, used for the first time, did not sound at all what either of them had expected. I shall remember the stone bench at York House. I shall remember it, also, in such manner as you shall require me to. Mrs. Holroyd shall be told. The Chancery shall proceed. The losing shall be made, in your terms, not unmaking. I shall undertake it. Theo. Imogen. There was a small silence. The thrush had stopped. The asters did what asters do in October afternoons, which is to stand quite still and let the colour fall off them slowly. When the lilacs come out, she said. He looked at her. He understood. He smiled. Actually smiled, properly. The smile he had not been smiling in a fortnight, and inclined his head. When the lilacs come out, he said, at the Holt, the terrace under the south wing. I will show you. There is a parterre. It is built badly. You will tell me how to rebuild it. We will rebuild it. She looked at him in the firelight. By the lilacs of the year following. By the lilacs of the year following. That, she said, is what I should have said, in any case, when Mrs. Holroyd has finished her quarter. I am setting it down, this afternoon, as the future thing I am working toward, that you and I may, both, in the meantime, work toward it without further confusion. I am not this afternoon postponing. I am setting a date. Imogen, he said, I shall hold you to the date. You shall. They drank the wine. Lady Crowburn came down from the morning room exactly when she had said she would, and observed, from the library window, 2 figures by the magnolia who were each, on examination, holding a glass of wine and standing in a posture of quiet conversation. And she took off her spectacles and put them on again, and went into the still room with Mrs. Lane to discuss the disposition of the quince jelly, with an expression of mild satisfaction which she did not undertake to explain. The next morning at the breakfast table, Lady Crowburn opened the Bath Chronicle. She read it. She read it again. She set the paper down on the cloth and laid one hand flat on it. Imogen, she said, Theo, who is mercifully not at this table, for which I am, this morning, grateful,
has been published. Imogen set down her teacup. The cup made a small, sharp sound on the saucer, and the sound carried across the room.
He has been, Lady Crowburn said. Published in the matter of his elder cousin's affianced bride. He has been published as, I quote, a gentleman of high station, whose private interest in the lady has become, of late, of so unequivocal a character, that the article in his cousin's hand, valid as it is in the eye of the law, has met with an opposition from a member of his own family, which can be construed as either honourable solicitude or, the public will judge, a less amiable motive. The piece is unsigned. It has gone through the editor at the third remove. It is a small piece of work, and one my pheasants do not, I am afraid, this season, suffice to undo. The print has gone out. It is in 17 drawing rooms by 10 o'clock. It will be in 3,000 by Tuesday. Imogen sat quite still. She did not take any of it in. She heard the words. She heard Lady Crowburn's hand flat on the paper. She heard, somewhere in the house above her, Mrs. Lane's footfall on a board. It says, then, Imogen said, that the Duke of Wraithmore's attentions to me are not honourable solicitude. It says they are a less amiable motive. It says, in the most public form available to him, that I am, the words are familiar, a season's diversion. It says, in effect, yes. And Sir Hugh? Sir Hugh, by the print of yesterday afternoon, has not been seen at York House since Wednesday. His servants are still there, his baggage is still there. He himself is, by my information, in his rooms with the curtains drawn. He has done what he came to Bath to do. He has, with this single piece of paper, made it impossible for Theo to continue to be seen at my door without putting on me a name I cannot, at 73, in this crescent, sustain without consequence to you. The print, by itself, will not decide. The print, however, will be the matter at every breakfast table in Bath at 10 o'clock. The clock on the mantelpiece struck the half. Imogen set her teacup back on the saucer. She put her hands together on her lap. "Where is Theo?" she said. "At the Christopher. His own breakfast has, by my report, not yet been taken in. He has not yet read the paper. He will, by 10 minutes past 9, have read it." Lady Crowburn folded her napkin. "He will come." "He will come." "He will not," Imogen said quietly, "be admitted." Lady Crowburn looked at her. Lady Crowburn, who, at 73, had seen the whole of the polite world's repertoire of small and middle-sized disasters, looked at her great niece for a long moment, and saw that the calculation had been made in the count of 10 seconds, and saw further that the calculation had been correct, and that the correctness, this morning, was the thing she could not, by any patient counsel, soften. "Imogen," she said gently. "Child, he is not a season's diversion." "He is not," Imogen said, "a season's diversion. He is, by what was printed this morning, a duke whose private interest in me has been made the lever by which the Calvert family is split in two. He has stood at my chair at the Octagon. He has been with me in this house, twice, for periods longer than the polite world has been comfortable with. He named a date at the Magnolia yesterday, a date I had named, which he accepted. The world has, in equally good faith and in public, understood the same arrangement to be of a kind no honourable man undertakes." She paused. Her hands were quite still on her lap. They were not, Lady Crowburn noticed, shaking at all. "He had courted me," she said, slow and precise, "for the discharge of his cousin's debt. At Witham Common, he set out two plans, Chancery and marriage. I chose the Chancery. He accepted. He named yesterday a date at which we should become the second alternative by our own consent, not under his cousin's pressure, the lilacs of the year following. The polite world has, this morning, taken that date from us. He cannot now stand by his name at my chair without compounding the injury. He has, by his own choosing me, made me unmarriageable to himself. His only honourable course is to withdraw publicly, and he shall, by 10 o'clock, have come to that decision in his own time, without my help. Imogen, Aunt, I shall not be received by him today, not tomorrow, not on any day until the Chancery suit has been concluded in such a way as makes my name independent of his. He had named the date at the Magnolia because he had not, in the moment, calculated the cost. The cost has been printed this morning. The cost shall not be paid by him. The cost shall be paid by me, by his absence from this door for as long as the Chancery requires. I shall write him a note at the Christopher this hour. I shall tell him not to come. I shall tell him I shall not, at any door of yours in Bath, see him before the Chancery is concluded. I shall. There she stopped, with her face in her hands for the count of 3 breaths, which was the second time in 3 years she had permitted herself the interval. Then she lifted her face out of her hands. I shall write the note, she said quietly. Mrs. Lane shall take it across the Crescent to the Christopher. He shall have it by 10. I shall not, at any window of this house today, watch the Crescent for him. Lady Crowburn did not speak. She set her hand on her great niece's, on the white tablecloth beside the Bath Chronicle, and held it there. Imogen wrote the note. The note went. He read it at the Christopher at 9:20. He did not come to the Crescent. He had courted her, the note said in 3 carefully composed sentences, in good faith. He had been, by the Bath Chronicle of this morning, made the instrument of a public injury he could not, by any further attention, mend. He had been used by his cousin to render unmarriageable to himself the only woman he had wished, in the privacy of an October garden, to marry. The naming of the date at the Magnolia had been an acceptance on the assumption that no further injury would intervene. The injury had intervened. The acceptance was now of a kind no honourable man could carry through. He should not come to the Crescent. He should not write again. He had been a season's diversion. Reading the sentence again in her own hand, it stood as she had written it. She folded the paper. She sealed it. Mrs. Lane took it across the Crescent. The morning ran on. By 10:30, the Bath Chronicle had reached the 17th drawing-room. The afternoon ran on. The Duke, at the Christopher, did not come. The Duke, at the Christopher, did not write. The Duke, at the Christopher, sat at the desk in the front sitting-room with his face in his hands for an hour, and then for another, and at 4 ordered Marston brought round, and rode out of Bath by the London road, without telling Harkness where he meant to go. The Duke had courted her for his cousin's debt. He had, in his own private estimate, fallen in love with her between Newark and Stilton. He had, at the Magnolia yesterday, accepted a date for the lilacs of the year following. He had, by the print of this morning, lost her. He rode along the London road in the cold October afternoon, and could not, for a stretch of several miles, look at the road. The cousin he had loved at 16, for opening a corridor door at Christchurch, had at last taken from him the only thing he had not been able to add to that ledger. He had ruined her by standing at her chair. He had paid out the last of Christchurch into the only currency he had wished, in his life, to spend on no one but her. The wind off the downs was cold. Marston went at his own pace. The signet on his right hand was, against his thumb, the most useless thing in the world. It was Mrs. Holroyd who, on the Tuesday following, walked from her chambers in Queen's Square to Lady Crowburn's door at 9 in the morning, with a leather folder under her arm and a small, flat object wrapped in linen in her reticule, and asked, with the politeness of a solicitor's widow who had been at her desk since 6, to be received by Miss Hartwell alone. Mrs. Holroyd was received. The library was lit. Imogen had not, in 4 days, slept above 3 hours at a time. Lady Crowburn was in the still room. Mrs. Holroyd sat down opposite Imogen, set the folder on the table, and folded her hands on it. "Miss Hartwell," she said, "I have, since Friday, been at work upon 2 matters. The first you know of, the second you do not. The first concerns the note for £9,000 against your father's name. The copy at the York House is dated 7th of June. The original was dated the 4th of August. The alteration is in the hand of an attorney's writer in Sir Hugh's pay. The purpose was to bring the note forward of the articles of betrothal of the 3rd of August. In plain English, the date is forged, and the forgery is provable by deposition from the clerk in Leeds, by the paper stock itself, which the Leeds attorney did not begin to use until the 3rd week of July, and by your father's banker. I have all 3 in this folder. I have, by Sunday's post, lodged copies with separate persons of my acquaintance in London, Bristol, and York." Miss Holroyd lifted her hand from the folder. Imogen, who had not interrupted, did not interrupt now. "Mrs. Holroyd," she said, "continue." "The second matter," Mrs. Holroyd said, "concerns the article of betrothal. The article names, in its body, a note which did not exist on the date the article was signed. By its own terms, the article is procured by a fraudulent representation. 3 separate counsel, to whom I have submitted the matter under seal, are agreed. The article shall not stand. The note shall not stand. The matter shall be disposed of in your favour by the Hillary Quarter Sessions. 8 weeks, not 14 months. The further matter," and Mrs. Holroyd here looked at Imogen quite steadily, "is that Sir Hugh Pelletier Calvert is, by the same papers, in danger of an indictment for fraud. The indictment is at your discretion." The fire crackled. A coal fell. Imogen looked at the folder. She looked at Mrs. Holroyd's hands on it. "The indictment," she said. "At your discretion, Miss Hartwell." "And His Grace?" "Is in Wiltshire, by my last report. He has been at his sister's house at Marlborough since Saturday night. He has not been told the contents of this folder. He has not been told that I am, this morning, in this room. I have not at any point communicated with him on the matter since Friday. I have come here today to lay the folder before you, because you are, in this matter, my client, and because the further conduct of the matter is, by every consideration, your decision. His Grace shall be told what you decide to tell him, by such means as you decide to tell him by, at such time as you decide. I shall not, in any communication of mine, preempt you." Imogen did not speak. She looked at the small, linen-wrapped object in Mrs. Holroyd's reticule. "And what is in the reticule, Mrs. Holroyd?" Mrs. Holroyd lifted the small, flat object out and set it on the linen on the table. She unwrapped it. It was a small, enamelled miniature in a silver oval. The painted face was that of a young woman of about 23, dark-haired, grey-eyed, with the kind of mouth that had once been a pleased mouth, and had not yet known it would not have time to be a serious one. There was a small dent in the silver of the back, and the chain was broken at one link, and the chain had been mended at that link in a hand which was clearly amateur, and clearly a young man's. It was not, Imogen knew at once, a recent mend. "This," Miss Holroyd said quietly, "was found yesterday at the York House by a chambermaid, the niece of my own woman, on the floor under Sir Hugh's bed. She brought it to my chambers at 6 this morning because, in her own words, the poor gentleman has dropped his thing under the bed and has not the strength to be picking it up himself. She did not know what it was. I have 2 options as to whom to return it. I may send it back to him directly by my clerk, or I may send it by the same clerk to the only other person who has, by your own report to me on Thursday, seen what the miniature is to him. The choice is yours, Miss Hartwell." Imogen looked at the miniature on the linen. She looked at the broken chain mended by an amateur hand. She thought of the figure at the stone bench in the back garden of the York House, in the cold yellow light of a Bath October at 4 o'clock, with his thumb passing across a painted face he had not, in 37 years, set down. "Mrs. Holroyd," she said, "bring me, this morning, the folder and the miniature. I shall take them, this afternoon, to the York House in your company. I shall lay before him, in order, the miniature first, then the deposition, the paper stock, the banker's receipt, and the article last. The consideration for withdrawal shall be that he sign, in his own hand, a withdrawal of the article and the note, a statement of the true date, and a letter to the editor of the Bath Chronicle withdrawing Friday's piece, and acknowledging the Duke's attentions as honourable. The letter shall be in mine before I leave the York House. After it is signed, the miniature shall be returned to him on the table at his hand." Mrs. Holroyd, at 53, had not in 20 years smiled in a client's library before the matter was disposed of. She permitted herself the deviation, this morning, of a small, brief, professional smile. "It shall be done, Miss Hartwell," she said. "I shall send my clerk to the York House at noon. We shall be at the York House door at 1. They were. The card went up. They were received. Sir Hugh Pelletier Calvert stood in the centre of his sitting room as they were admitted. He had not, that day, gone out, and his face, on seeing Imogen at the threshold with Mrs. Holroyd at her shoulder, was for a quarter of a second the face Imogen had seen at the stone bench, and was then again the face of the polite world. He bowed. "Miss Hartwell," he said. "Mrs. Holroyd." "Sir Hugh," Imogen said, "may I sit?" "You may." She sat. Mrs. Holroyd remained standing. Mrs. Holroyd set the leather folder on the small table between Imogen's chair and Sir Hugh's, and laid the linen beside it. She did not unwrap the linen. Sir Hugh sat opposite. Imogen unwrapped the linen herself. She lifted the small enamelled miniature on the flat of her gloved hand. She set it, painted face up, on the table where his hand could reach it, but did not reach it. "Sir Hugh," she said quietly, "this was, by yesterday's report, on the floor under your bed. A chambermaid found it. The chambermaid did not know what it was. I do." The Duke did not speak. His face, which Imogen had seen whiten on Thursday morning at her great-aunt's library, did not whiten. It steadied. It steadied in the way the face of a man steadies when he is finally permitted to take off a weight he has been carrying for 26 years. Picking up the miniature, he did not look at it. He looked at her. Then he set it back down. He laid his right hand flat on the table beside it. "Miss Hartwell," he said, "continue." She continued. She laid out the deposition. She laid out the sample of the Leeds attorney's paper stock dated July. She laid out the banker's receipt. She laid out the certified copy of the article. She did not accuse him. She described. Mrs. Holroyd, when consulted by a glance, supplied the 4 place names and the 3 dates and the 1 street in Leeds with the calm of a clerk reading out a list. The afternoon ran on. The York House sitting room smelled of old wood and a fire that had burned too long without being raked. Sir Hugh did not interrupt. When she had laid out the last of the 4 documents, she folded her hands on her lap and waited. "Miss Hartwell," he said. His voice was even. "I shall, with your leave, write." "You shall." Rising, he crossed to his own writing desk. He sat. He drew a sheet of paper toward him. He wrote, in his own hand, 3 documents, in the order she had named. The withdrawal of the article and the note, the statement as to the true date of the original note, the letter to the editor of the Bath Chronicle. He did not hesitate at any phrase. He signed each. He dated each. He sanded each. He folded the article and the note across the writing desk, set them on the blotter, and laid the originals, the article and the note, out of an inner cupboard beside them. He brought all 5 papers and laid them on the table between her and his chair. He sat down. "Miss Hartwell," he said, "I beg your pardon for what I have done in Bath these 3 weeks, and for what I should have done in Yorkshire these 3 months. I shall not, in this lifetime, ask either pardon to be granted. I ask only that you take what is on the table and go from this room with the matter in your hand, finished. I am, by every reckoning the polite world shall make of me by Friday, a man whose name is ruined. I am also a man who, 4 years ago, ought to have laid down the miniature on the table at your hand. I shall, this evening, take the mail to Dover. I shall not return to Bath. I beg, if you can find it in you, that you carry the letter to the editor by Mrs. Holroyd's clerk before 3, so that tomorrow's print shall carry it. I shall not ask for the miniature. The fire shifted. Imogen looked at the small, enamelled miniature on the table. She looked at the painted face. She looked, very briefly, at Sir Hugh's hand, which had been laid flat on the table beside it, and which had not, at any moment of his speech, moved. She picked up the miniature. She turned it over in her gloved fingers. She read on the back, in a young man's amateur hand from 26 years ago, the small scratched word, Lavinia. Sir Hugh, she said, I shall not ask for the indictment. He did not steady. He sat, for the count of 2 breaths, his face in the gesture of a man who had not, in any conversation of his life, been forgiven a single thing. Miss Hartwell, he said, I shall not ask for the indictment. I shall ask only what you have already given. You shall keep the miniature. She set it back down on the linen, on his side of the table, within reach of his hand. It was not, this afternoon, mine to take. It was an artifact of the conversation. It is, this evening, yours again. He did not pick it up. He did not need to. He had not, in any moment of the conversation, taken his eyes from her face. He inclined his head, very slowly, the way a man inclines his head who has, for the first time in his life, been required by another person's plain decency to inhabit his own. And the small, careful gesture was, in him, the apology she had not asked for, and had not, in fact, required. The 4 documents went out of the York House at 2:20 in the hand of Mrs. Holroyd's clerk. The print of the next morning carried it on the front column. Sir Hugh Pelletier Calvert took the mail to Dover that evening, sailed for the Low Countries on the Friday tide, and did not return to England in the lifetimes of any of the 3 persons who had been in the York House sitting room that afternoon. Imogen walked back to the Crescent with Mrs. Holroyd. She did not speak. The Bath afternoon was cold. She reached the door at 3. Lady Crowburn was at the door. Imogen put the original article and the original note into her great-aunt's hand, kissed her on the cheek, and went up to her front room. She lay down on the bed in her travelling pelisse with her boots still on. She slept 11 hours. She woke at 2 in the morning, lit her own candle from the embers in the grate, and wrote in her own hand to His Grace at Marlborough a letter of 1 page setting out the facts of the previous afternoon at the York House, the state of the documents now in her great-aunt's possession, and the absence of any further matter standing between him and the date she had named at the Magnolia. She sealed the letter. She set it on the hall table for the Morning Post. She went back to bed and slept until 8. The Duke read the letter at his sister's breakfast table in Marlborough at 1 in the afternoon of the following day. He read it twice. He did not finish his coffee. He was on Marston by 1:30. He rode all afternoon and all the evening, and changed horses twice on the Bath Road, and he was at Lady Crowburn's door at the 7th house from the western end of the Royal Crescent at 4 in the morning. He did not knock. He stood on the step. Lady Crowburn's footman, who had been instructed at midnight, admitted him at once and walked him through to the library without a question. He was put in the chair by the fire. A glass of Madeira was set at his hand. The library door closed. Imogen came down, in her wrapper, with her hair plaited for the night, 10 minutes later. She had been awake. She had been waiting. Not in the sense of staying up, but in the sense of knowing he would come, and being ready when he did. She closed the door behind her and crossed the room. He had stood up when she entered. She stopped a pace from him. "Theo," she said. She did not look away. Imogen. I have been, for 4 days, a fool. You have been, he said, the considered manager of a matter no woman of your age should have been required to manage. You have brought it, at the cost of 4 days of your sleep and your own kindness to yourself, to a clean end. I have been, the 4 days, the slowest creature in Wiltshire. You were not slow. You wrote me no letter because I forbade you to write me. I had set you, by my own hand, outside Lady Crowburn's door. You set me outside the door, he said, because you would not allow me to be the means by which you became, in print, what you had climbed out of a window to escape. I have not, in this lifetime, been loved by anyone in the way you set me outside that door. I wrote to my sisters, because I could not have remained in any town the print might be read in again. By Sunday afternoon, I had written you 12 letters and sent none of them. By Tuesday morning, I had decided to ride back to Bath whether or not you should be at home to me. I had begun the 13th, when your letter came into my hand. She looked at him. He had not, in the riding, had time to shave. The dark beard was on his jaw. He had not, in the riding, slept. He was the most beautiful thing she had seen in any room in her life. Theo, she said, I shall not marry you to be free of your cousin. Your cousin is, by yesterday's post, in Holland. I propose to marry, in my own time and by my own consent, on the date I named at the Magnolia, a man with whom I should like to spend the next 40 years, rebuilding a parterre at the south wing of the Holt. The parterre is, by your account, built badly. I have, in my room upstairs, the small notebook in which I have made the rough plan. I shall show it to you after breakfast. You shall, after breakfast, kiss me on the cheek, only on the cheek this morning. The rest is for the lilacs. And you shall, at noon, drive me up to the Magnolia in the back garden of this crescent, and you shall there, in the presence of my great-aunt, ask me again what you asked me on Thursday last. I shall answer. I shall not, between now and the lilacs, set you outside my door. He did not move. Then he crossed the half-pace between them and laid his right hand, very lightly, on the side of her face, and kissed her. On the cheek, only on the cheek, exactly where she had said, and kept his hand there for the count of 3 breaths, and lowered his hand, and stood back. Imogen Hartwell, he said, you are the only woman in my life I have not, in 12 years, been able to put into the ledger of my cousin's debt. You shall not, in the next 12, be put into any ledger of mine. You shall be, by the lilacs, Calvert. Imogen Calvert. We shall, at the parterre, begin. By the lilacs, she said. By the lilacs. They sat by the fire. Lady Crowburn, at 5:30, came down in her own wrapper, looked at them once across the doorway, looked at the second class at his elbow, and went into the still-room with Mrs. Lane to discuss the breakfast tray, with an expression of mild satisfaction she did not undertake to explain. The Chancery suit was discontinued in the second week of November. The article and the note were destroyed in Lady Crowburn's library fire on the 11th. The standing timber on the South Plantation was sold in early December, and the smaller note discharged. Her father died on the 3rd of February in his own bed, with his daughter's hand under his. She brought him to his rest in the small Yorkshire parish church, and returned to Bath on the 10th. The house was sold in March under the entail. The proceeds she gave, by Mrs. Holroyd's hand, to the parish school of the village, whose vicar had taught her, as a child, the only Latin she ever properly knew. The lilacs of Calvert Holt came out that year in the 3rd week of May, 8 in number, 4 white and 4 mauve, planted in the south wing border where Theodore's grandfather had set them in the year of the king's recovery. Beneath them, the old yew parterre of 1791 had been lifted in April and rebuilt to Imogen's plan. Pale stone beds, lavender and rosemary and sage, a central knot of clipped myrtle, and 4 corner urns of asters, which would bloom, late in the year, the same fierce purple as Lady Crowburn's October garden. They were married in the chapel at Calvert Holt on the 23rd of May. Lady Adela Crowburn gave the bride away. Gave her away, she observed dryly to her footman afterwards, being entirely the wrong verb, as I have at no point in the morning surrendered anything. Mrs. Holroyd attended. Harkness attended. Mrs. Burrell, the housekeeper at the Holt, stood at the back of the chapel in her best black bombazine, with her gloved hands folded over the prayer book given her at her confirmation in 1773, wearing a small, considering pleasure, which she did not undertake to explain. The chapel was lit with the morning sun off the south wing. The asters of October, not yet in season, were represented in the bride's nosegay by 4 sprigs of late-flowering rosemary, the only obtainable purple at the date. After the service they walked, the two of them, by the south wing terrace and down the 4 shallow steps to the new parterre, and stood at the centre of the new myrtle knot, where the gravel of the crosspaths met, and looked up at the lilac border, where the 8 lilacs were, that morning, in full bloom. 4 white, 4 mauve, the air heavy with them, a thrush in the next field calling the same autumn song her cousins in Bath had been calling in October, brought forward 7 months by the warmth of the Yorkshire spring. He set his hand on the gatepost at the foot of the parterre steps. She set her hand on his. "Tomorrow," she said, "take me into the kitchen garden. Mrs. Burrell tells me the wisteria on the south face of the kitchen offices is 60 years old, and no one has measured it since 1804. He looked at her. He smiled. The small, fractional smile he had given her at the Black Horse in Ferrybridge, and again in the carriage south of Newark, and again at the Magnolia in Lady Crowburn's back garden, and once more in the library at 4 in the morning of a day in early November. And his thumb did not move across the signet ring. "Imogen Calvert," he said. "I shall measure it with you." The thrush in the next field finished the song. The lilacs, in the warm Yorkshire May, gave off the heavy sweet weight that lilacs give off in the 3rd week of May at Calvert Holt. The asters of October were not, that morning, in the borders. The rosemary sprigs in her hand were warm where she had been holding them. She rested her hand on the gatepost above his hand. "By the wisteria," she said. "By the wisteria," he said, and laughed. And she laughed with him, and the gatepost under their joined hands was warm with the May sun.